Fleet repositions. Right now, at this exact moment, Chinese transport aircraft are touching down at Bandar Abbas Naval Base on the Persian Gulf coast, offloading crates containing what Iranian state media calls advanced anti-ship cruise missiles capable of striking aircraft carriers at extended range. The United States Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, claims these are older C-802 missiles with limited capability. China's foreign ministry refuses to confirm or deny the transfer entirely. But commercial satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies captured on April 2, 2026, shows something undeniable. 4 Y-20 heavy transport aircraft on the tarmac at Bandar Abbas, massive cylindrical containers being moved by Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy personnel, and the immediate repositioning of Iran's 3 Kilo-class submarines from their usual berths to forward deployment positions near the Strait of Hormuz. This represents the first confirmed direct Chinese weapons transfer to Iranian naval forces in over a decade, crossing a threshold that fundamentally alters the military balance in the world's most strategic maritime choke point. Let me walk you through exactly what happened over the past 72 hours. At 0340 hours local time on Monday, April 1, 2026, flight tracking data showed 4 Chinese Air Force Y-20 transport aircraft departing Urumqi Air Base in western China's Xinjiang province. These weren't following normal commercial routes. The aircraft flew southwest across Pakistan's airspace, entered Iranian airspace over Zahedan at approximately 0920 hours, and proceeded directly to Bandar Abbas on the Strait of Hormuz coast. At 11:45 hours local time, all 4 aircraft landed at Bandar Abbas Naval Base within a 20-minute window. Iranian state television broadcast carefully edited footage at 1830 hours showing IRGC Navy commanders inspecting the cargo, though the footage deliberately avoided showing missile specifics. By 2200 hours Monday evening, Western intelligence sources speaking to Reuters confirmed the transfer involved anti-ship missiles, though the exact type remained disputed. Tuesday morning at 0600 hours, satellite imagery providers including Planet Labs and Maxar captured the Y-20 aircraft still on the ground with loading equipment positioned nearby. Most significantly, by Tuesday afternoon at 1500 hours, Iran's 3 Kilo-class submarines designated Tariq, Noor and Younes had departed their standard moorings at Bandar Abbas and repositioned to forward locations. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, operating in the Arabian Sea approximately 250 nautical miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz, adjusted its patrol pattern Tuesday evening, moving an additional 80 nautical miles further from the strait. This timeline establishes something critical. China didn't just deliver weapons. Iran immediately operationalized them by repositioning its most valuable naval assets into strike positions, and the United States immediately adjusted its carrier positioning in response. To understand the strategic significance, you need to understand what weapons China likely delivered and what they enable Iran to do. Iranian state media claims these are advanced anti-ship cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 300 kilometers, which matches the specifications of China's YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship cruise missile. The YJ-12 is not a basic anti-ship weapon. This is a ramjet-powered supersonic missile traveling at Mach 3 to Mach 4 speeds, carrying a 205-kilogram semi-armor-piercing warhead with an operational range of 250 to 400 kilometers depending on flight profile. The guidance system combines inertial navigation, GPS, and active radar homing in the terminal phase, making it extremely difficult to spoof or jam. China developed the YJ-12 specifically to threaten American carrier strike groups operating near Taiwan, and its performance characteristics represent a generational leap beyond anything currently in Iran's naval arsenal. Iran's existing anti-ship missiles include the Chinese C-802 from the 1990s with a 120-kilometer range and subsonic speed, easily intercepted by modern defense systems, and the domestically produced Noor missile, essentially a reverse-engineered C-802 with marginal improvements. The YJ-12 changes the equation completely. Its supersonic speed compresses reaction time for defensive systems. A missile traveling at Mach 3, 5 covers 400 kilometers in approximately 7 minutes, giving a carrier strike group extremely limited time to detect, track, and engage. The United States Navy's Aegis combat system with SM-6 interceptors can defeat supersonic threats, but magazine depth becomes the critical constraint. Each SM-6 interceptor costs $2 million, and destroyers carry finite loads typically between 60 and 96 missiles total, not all of which are anti-air capable. If China delivered even 24 YJ-12 missiles to Iran, that's sufficient to create saturation attack scenarios where Iranian forces launch multiple missiles simultaneously from different vectors, overwhelming defensive systems through sheer volume. Western intelligence officials speaking to the Wall Street Journal assessed that China delivered between 20 and 30 YJ-12 missiles based on the cargo capacity of 4 Y-20 aircraft, though Iran could potentially have received production equipment or technical documentation enabling domestic manufacturing. The strategic significance extends beyond the missiles themselves. Iran's 3 Kilo-class submarines, built in Russia between 1992 and 1996, are diesel-electric boats exceptionally quiet when operating on battery power. These submarines can carry anti-ship missiles and launch them while submerged or from surface positions. The combination of supersonic anti-ship missiles launched from submarines creates a nightmare scenario for carrier defense. Surface vessels can be tracked by satellite and engaged preemptively. Submarines operating in the shallow, thermally complex waters of the Persian Gulf are extremely difficult to track and localize. A Kilo submarine firing 4 YJ-12 missiles from a position 200 kilometers from a carrier strike group coordinated with shore-based missile batteries firing additional salvos creates a defensive problem that current American systems struggle to solve reliably. Here's the strategic context that explains why China made this transfer now and what it means for regional power dynamics. From China's perspective, this weapons delivery serves multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. First, it strengthens Iran as a strategic partner capable of threatening American military assets in the Middle East, potentially forcing the United States to divert naval resources away from the Indo-Pacific where China faces Taiwan contingencies. According to Dr. Toshi Yoshihara, senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, China views Iran's geographic position astride the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic asset in a broader competition with the United States. Enhancing Iran's anti-access capabilities ties down American naval forces and creates dilemmas about resource allocation between theaters. Second, the transfer demonstrates to other potential weapons customers that China provides cutting-edge military technology, not just export-grade inferior systems. Russia has historically dominated the high-end weapons market in the Middle East, but Russian systems underperformed dramatically in recent conflicts, damaging that reputation. China positions itself as the new premium supplier. Third, this move directly challenges the informal understanding between China and the United States that China would limit advanced weapons transfers to Iran to avoid destabilizing the Gulf. By breaking that understanding, China signals it no longer feels constrained by American preferences in its strategic decision-making. From Iran's perspective, these missiles represent a critical capability gap filled at exactly the right moment. Iran has spent 3 decades developing asymmetric capabilities to deter American military action, recognizing it cannot match American conventional superiority directly. The strategy centers on making any American military operation against Iran prohibitively costly by threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, strike regional bases, and attack American vessels. But Iran's existing anti-ship missiles lacked the speed and range to credibly threaten a carrier strike group operating beyond the immediate Gulf waters. Carriers could launch strikes from the Arabian Sea beyond Iranian missile range with impunity. The YJ-12 changes that calculation. Now, even carriers operating 300 kilometers from Iranian coastline face credible threat, forcing them either to withdraw further, reducing sortie efficiency, or accept substantially elevated risk. According to Farzin Nadimi, senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Iran's acquisition of supersonic anti-ship missiles represents the most significant enhancement to its naval strike capability since it obtained Kilo-class submarines in the 1990s. This fundamentally alters American operational planning for any potential conflict scenario. From the United States' perspective, this development creates severe strategic headaches. The Biden administration spent significant diplomatic capital rebuilding relationships with China after the Trump era, seeking Chinese cooperation on climate change, North Korea, and economic issues. This weapons transfer demonstrates that China prioritizes its strategic competition with the United States over any cooperative relationship, willing to arm American adversaries with systems designed specifically to kill American service members. The Pentagon now faces difficult resource allocation decisions. Does the Navy surge additional destroyers to the Fifth Fleet area of operations to provide layered defense, pulling them from Pacific duties? Does CENTCOM request additional air defense batteries for regional bases that might also come under attack? Does the Air Force position stealth bombers for potential preemptive strikes on Iranian missile sites before they can be operationalized? Each option carries costs and risks. Historical precedent suggests this kind of major weapons transfer typically signals broader strategic alignment. In 1979, China began selling Silkworm anti-ship missiles to Iran, marking the beginning of a weapons relationship that continued sporadically for decades. In the 1990s, Russia sold Iran Kilo submarines and S-300 air defense systems, signaling Moscow's decision to align more closely with Tehran despite Western objections. This YJ-12 transfer likely represents not a one-time sale but the beginning of a deeper China-Iran military technology partnership that could include additional missile types, electronic warfare systems, satellite intelligence sharing, and potentially even nuclear technology in the future. There are three scenarios for how this development plays out over the next weeks and months, each with different probability and implications. Scenario 1 represents diplomatic de-escalation through negotiated constraints. Probability 30%. In this pathway, the United States engages China directly, possibly through high-level diplomatic channels or back-channel military-to-military communications, demanding that China cease further weapons transfers and provide assurances that no additional advanced systems will be delivered to Iran. China, not seeking direct military confrontation with the United States despite strategic competition, agrees to informal constraints while maintaining the delivery already completed. Iran, having achieved its objective of obtaining the missiles, does not immediately operationalize them in provocative ways, instead using them as deterrent capability without testing or demonstrating. The United States adjusts its carrier operating patterns to maintain greater distance from Iranian coastline but does not undertake military action against the missiles themselves. This scenario requires all three parties to exercise restraint. China would need to view the strategic benefit of the single transfer as sufficient without escalating further. Iran would need to resist the temptation to test or demonstrate the new capability, which would be domestically popular but internationally escalatory. The United States would need to accept the new reality without attempting to destroy the missiles preemptively, which would risk broader conflict. The pathway is possible but requires significant diplomatic engagement and mutual restraint that may not exist given current tensions. Scenario 2 represents controlled escalation and operational testing. Probability 45%. In this more likely pathway, Iran proceeds to operationalize the YJ-12 missiles over the next 30 to 60 days, conducting training exercises and possibly test launches in the Persian Gulf or Gulf of Oman to demonstrate capability. China continues to provide technical support and possibly additional deliveries of related systems like surveillance drones or targeting data. The United States responds with enhanced defensive posturing, surging additional Aegis destroyers to the region, conducting more frequent carrier strike group exercises, demonstrating defensive capabilities, and potentially conducting intelligence operations to map exact locations of missile batteries. This creates a tense but manageable competition where both sides demonstrate capability without actual combat. Iran gains the domestic and regional prestige of possessing carrier-killer missiles, China demonstrates its role as Iran's strategic partner, and the United States shows it can adapt defenses without backing down. The risk in this scenario is miscalculation or accident. If Iran conducts a test launch that inadvertently flies too close to American vessels, or if American intelligence operations to locate missiles are detected and interpreted as preparation for preemptive strike, the situation could escalate rapidly beyond anyone's intentions. This scenario represents the most probable near-term trajectory because it allows all parties to advance their interests without immediate crisis, but it increases long-term conflict risk substantially. Scenario 3 represents preemptive American military action. Probability 25%. In this pathway, the United States decides that allowing Iran to operationalize YJ-12 missiles creates unacceptable risk to carrier strike groups and decides to destroy the missiles before they can be fully deployed and protected. This could involve precision strikes using stealth aircraft, Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from submarines, or special operations raids to destroy missiles while still concentrated at Bandar Abbas or during transfer to dispersed sites. The logic would mirror Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities or Syrian weapons transfers to Hezbollah, prevent capability deployment rather than deter its use after deployment. However, this scenario carries extreme escalation risk. Any American strike on Iranian soil, even limited to specific military targets, would trigger Iranian retaliation against American forces, regional bases, or commercial shipping. Iran has repeatedly stated that any attack on its territory will result in massive retaliation across multiple fronts. China would face significant domestic pressure to respond to American destruction of weapons it just delivered, possibly by accelerating additional transfers or providing Iran with intelligence support. The scenario could rapidly expand from limited strikes to regional conflict involving multiple actors. American military planners recognize this risk, making preemptive action unlikely unless intelligence indicates Iran is preparing imminent offensive action using the missiles. Watch for 5 critical indicators over the next 2 to 4 weeks that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, satellite imagery of Bandar Abbas and other Iranian naval facilities. If the missiles remain concentrated at the delivery site, that suggests Iran is either conducting training without immediate operational deployment or facing technical challenges with the systems. If satellite imagery shows the missiles being dispersed to multiple coastal locations or loaded aboard vessels, that indicates Iran is moving toward operational deployment consistent with Scenario 2. Commercial satellite providers like Planet Labs and Maxar will release imagery every 48 to 72 hours, allowing independent verification. Second, American naval movements in the region. If the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group maintains its current position in the Arabian Sea without additional destroyers or cruisers joining, that suggests the United States is accepting the new capability without major force posture adjustment consistent with Scenario 1. If additional Aegis-capable destroyers deploy to Fifth Fleet from other theaters, or if a second carrier strike group receives deployment orders to the region, that indicates the United States is preparing for extended period of heightened tension and possible conflict, consistent with Scenario 2 or 3. Naval deployment orders are not classified and will appear in Navy press releases and shipping movement databases. Third, Chinese diplomatic and military activity. If China's foreign ministry begins offering explanations or justifications for the transfer in press briefings, that suggests Beijing is preparing for sustained international criticism and plans to defend the decision politically. If Chinese military advisors or technicians arrive in Iran to support missile integration visible through airport arrival data or Iranian media coverage, that indicates deeper Chinese commitment to ensuring the weapons are successfully operationalized. If Chinese naval vessels begin operating more frequently in the Indian Ocean or Arabian Sea, that could signal Chinese intent to monitor developments or even provide indirect support to Iran. Fourth, Iranian public messaging and military exercises. If Iran's leadership, particularly Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei or IRGC Navy Commander Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri make public statements about the missiles or announce military exercises involving anti-ship systems, that indicates Iran intends to maximize political and deterrent value by publicizing the capability. If Iran remains relatively quiet, mentioning the delivery only in passing, that suggests a more cautious approach consistent with de-escalation. Watch for announcements of naval exercises in the Strait of Hormuz or Gulf of Oman involving missile launches, which would represent operational testing consistent with Scenario 2. Fifth, American diplomatic engagement intensity. If Secretary of State announces upcoming meetings with Chinese counterparts specifically discussing regional security, or if high-level American defense officials travel to Gulf allies like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain, that indicates active diplomatic efforts to manage the situation consistent with Scenario 1. If such diplomatic engagement is absent or limited to public statements condemning the transfer, that suggests either American acceptance of fait accompli or preparation for more confrontational response. Congressional testimony by Pentagon officials about the transfer will also reveal internal American assessment of threat severity and response options. I'm tracking every one of these indicators in real time through multiple sources including satellite imagery providers, military flight tracking databases, official government statements, and defense analyst networks. When Iran makes its next move with these missiles, when China's next transport aircraft takes off for Bandar Abbas, when American carriers adjust position or additional destroyers receive deployment orders, you will understand the significance here first with the technical depth and strategic context mainstream media cannot provide. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on all notifications because this situation is developing rapidly. The delivery of these missiles represents a fundamental shift in the military balance in the world's most critical maritime choke point, through which 21% of global oil supplies flow daily. The next 2 to 4 weeks determine whether this becomes a managed competition, a crisis spiral, or an actual shooting war. You need to understand not just what is happening but why it matters and what comes next. Drop a comment right now. Do you think the United States will strike these missiles before Iran can deploy them? Do you think China will continue delivering advanced weapon systems to Iran despite American objections? Do you think this makes a Iran-US conflict more or less likely in 2026? I read every comment and I need to know what you're seeing from your perspective. 4 Chinese transport aircraft just changed the balance of power in the Persian Gulf. The missiles are on Iranian soil. The submarines are repositioning. The carriers pulling back. The clock is ticking on decisions that will determine whether 21% of global oil keeps flowing or whether the Strait of Hormuz becomes a combat zone. Thanks for watching. The next move belongs to Iran, and we're about to find out whether they chose deterrence or demonstration.